Hey, welcome back to another video right here on Free Will Photos. Today, what we're going to be looking at is the overview of which filters affect color overall. In some of the previous videos, you may have seen me using the saturation, the hue, the vibrance sliders, and all that. But there are a lot of filters, so to speak, that they also work inside of ON1 to adjust your color. So we're going to do a very quick overview, and I'm going to explain what each of those kind of do. So stay tuned. Welcome back. Hey, I have no idea why I winked at the end of that last one, but hey, I'm going to keep it in there because, yeah, that's just the way it is, right? All right, so here we are inside of ON1 Photo Raw. I'm in the develop module. We're going to jump over to the effects. Now, obviously, before we do that, we do have a few color options that we can adjust here inside of the develop module. One of those being the white balance. Now, if you shot a photo in RAW, all right, if you shot a photo in RAW and you have something that looks like this, whatever, then you're going to want to adjust your white balance. All right. Now, there's a ton of ways of adjusting your white balance, but I recommend that you always start with fixing your white balance if you have a raw photo. Some other things that will adjust your color, so to speak, we'll go back to as shot so you can see what's happening here, is your camera profile. Now, ON1 has some standard profiles, and landscape is going to adjust some of the contrast, but it's going to make that color a little bit more vivid or vibrant. Portrait is going to mute some of your colors and make the overall photo a little bit brighter. ON1 Vivid is going to darken those colors. It's almost like a multiply effect over the entire image, but you can see the difference in the colors, really in the brightness of the image. And then there's the neutral, which makes the colors fairly flat. Now, I'm not going to tell you which one of these you should be using because quite honestly, I use whichever one gives me the best starting place. All right. So I'm just going to leave it on standard for today. And as you can see, it's a little bit of a darker image. The greens, they're just not as green as if I were on landscape, right? If I'm on landscape, look at how green those are compared to here. But between your camera profile and your temperature, or I'm sorry, your white balance, not just temperature, that will adjust your color accordingly. All right. So just keep that in mind. This will affect your color. And then, of course, you have saturation and vibrance. If you haven't already caught that video, then I recommend you go back and watch saturation and vibrance. But moral of the story, you can increase or decrease how much color you have in the overall color range. And then you can fine tune that a little bit by increasing or decreasing specific to the middle grays of the image. That's in a nutshell. Now, let's hop over to our effects and take a look at which one of what each of these effects kind of does. That's terrible English. We're just going to look at effects and see how it impacts the color on your photo. All right. So the first filter that we're looking at is the antique. And this is by, straight out of the box, this is giving you more of a muted look. So if I turn this off, you can see that the photo has, clear, crisp overall colors. And then when I turn it on, it gives it more of a muted look. Now, this could be the feeling that you're going for in the image. You want to make it look a little bit more like airy or like, what's the word that I'm thinking of? Well, antique, of course, but old-timey, right? Like this is a throwback. It's a photo that you took yesterday, but you want to look like, or you want to make it look like you took it 17 years ago or 25 years ago, whatever. Antique type look. All right. Now, I'm not going to go over the sliders in each of these because this is just an overview so you can get an idea. Now, later in the series, we're going to go into each of the filters that I show you. So that way you can get an idea of which filter you want to go for. That's essentially what this is. So obviously antique, it says enough. If you want to get something that looks like yesteryear, then go ahead and grab that one. The next one on the list is black and white. Black and white. Now, I have a full video on how the black and white filter works and is explained. That'll be posted eventually. I'm not quite sure if it's a part of this series or not just yet, but nonetheless, black and white, obviously it's going to take away your saturation and only leave you with your brightness values based off of the colors that were in your photo. We know that we had a lot of green in this photo, so if I increase, and it's actually only working in this foreground, so that means that most of these greens are probably on the yellow line, and you can see how the grass is starting to get brighter and a little bit darker. So just because there's no saturation in the image doesn't mean that you're not eligible or able to adjust the way that the color responds. So obviously black and white strips away all the color. Most of this series is going to be focused on enhancing color. So we're just going to keep on moving, but just know that black and white obviously affects the color and it affects it by removing it. The next filter is the color adjustment. Now, we're not going to get into the channel mixer. That's way too technical and not necessary for this particular series. So the color adjustment. Now, this is probably the go-to basic. I want to enhance my colors in my image. Now, as we've seen in the black and white filter, if I click on the yellow channel and I just increase the saturation, guess what? My grass is going to start getting a little bit more yellow, or I can just increase the brightness and now it gets a little bit brighter. Maybe I want it to be a little bit green, more green, and then maybe even come into the green channel, darken it, and then add in a little bit more saturation. And look at that. I have made myself some fairly green grass. Yay. Moral of the story. This is more of the increase decrease module effect on very specific colors. You have a lot of power here, and not to mention all of these come with a mask. So you may need to add in multiple adjustments just so you can mask in the color that you want. But again, we'll get into that later in the series when we start to put all this stuff together. Just trying to set the foundation right now. All right. But I do encourage you all to experiment with this. And the next one down the line is the color enhancer. Again, this is the exact same thing as the color adjustment. You just have a little bit more options here. One of them is the white balance feature. This is really designed for getting rid of a color cast that you may have on your image, especially after you've done some color enhancements. Maybe you just want to get the image back to that white balance that you set originally. And then also being able to mask in whatever your changes are. And then of course you have your color range down here again. This is again a tool that you would use if you wanted to increase or decrease a specific color range, but you would specifically grab the color enhancer if there is some sort of highlight and shadow area that you want to protect as you make your adjustments here in the color range, as well as in the white balance or color cast correction. The next one is going to be color balance. Now, this is a fun one, and this is where creativity really meets the road. The way that this one works is, first, I always like to bring my amount up to about 50%, all right? Give or take, somewhere in the middle, just so I can see what I'm doing. And then if you remember from the hue, saturation, and brightness video, then you'll remember that you can move your hue anywhere on the color spectrum. And what I'm doing is just dragging along here. Now, the downside to using this particular item, the color balance, is you don't get to have access to the color wheel or the sliders the way that you do in the local adjustment as I showed in that video. And you're really just going based off of what you see here, but I would argue you should pay attention to what you see in the image overall. The difference with the color balance and all of the other adjustments is this one is detailed specifically, or I guess not detailed. This one specifically paints itself into the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows, and you get different adjustments for all three of those categories in your image. So really what you can do is look at your histogram and start to build whatever color space that you want. There is a really good opportunity here to build mood very specific to what you want, right? If you want those dark blue shadows, then you can come in here to bring your hue over to blue somewhere in there, and then just bring your saturation up. And as you can see, I may have gone too far, so I could pull it over here, and I want these to be a little bit darker. And maybe that's just too much blue in the shadows, so then I can just dial it back, and there you go. Now it's kind of like this really cool day. Highlights, if I wanted to bring those more into a golden color, maybe somewhere maybe around here, and then I can just adjust the brightness, and now you have a different type of mood. We'll get into how to set mood in images later on in the course. All right, so there you go. Color balance. This is a shifting of the color, but very specifically to the highlights, the midtones, and the shadows, and only adding color into those areas, right? So the next one, all right, the next item is the cross process. Now, I have a video that's already posted on the channel. I'll link that in the cards and in the video description that talks all about the cross process and it being explained. But you can see that this ultimately affects the color, and it does it in a shifting kind of way. Now, I never recommend running this particular, or very rarely will I recommend running this particular filter at full strength. I would probably always recommend that you dial it back, and blue just doesn't look good. Maybe a green or even a yellow would probably be appropriate for this image. So yeah, you really have to play around with this and figure out which one works the best, and even the amount may be too much. So overall, just know that cross process will shift your colors. There are some creative ways of using it, and we'll look at some of those in this series, but I'll be honest, I don't grab this particular filter all that often. This is a very specific niche type filter. All right, so the next thing is my favorite filter, and I probably throw this on just about every single picture, which is the curves adjustment. Now, obviously, you can impact your tonality by bringing your curves up or down, and that's probably what most of us already know. But you can really dive deep into these red, green, and blue channels and do the exact same type of adjustments to your midtones, your highlights, or your shadows, and really get a little bit more granular with the way that your color looks in your photos. Now, obviously, you have to understand a little bit of color theory with this. If I bring this up, I get a ton of red. If I bring this down, then I get a ton of blue. All right. Now, one thing that I hate about the curves adjustment filter is you can't delete these points. I wish you could just click on it and then hit the delete key or a delete key and they would go away, even if I could right click and get rid of them. If you know how to get rid of these little buttons on the curves, please let me know. All right, but moral of the story, you can go into either one of these channels, increase a color or decrease a color. Now, this comes in really, really handy when you are looking to throw on a blend mode, right? Or an apply to. Maybe I only want to apply this to the highlights, the monotones, the midtones, the shadows, or sometimes you may even want to apply an adjustment just to the neutral colors, or like the middle grays. This is, again, something that you can use creatively, but you have an opportunity here to do a lot of stuff. Obviously, that's me getting way too deep. I love using the curves adjustment just because you can do a lot of cool things with it. All right. The next one is Luts. Now, if you are not a member of using Luts, I have to be the first to tell you, using a LUT can give you an instant look or mood just by turning on the filter, right? And depending on if you have any of these are specific add-ons. This is actually a custom LUT that I made for something else. Does not work so well with this particular image, but you know, it's there, right? I will have to show you how to make LUTs. You cannot make LUTs inside of ON1. I would like them to be able to make LUTs, or at least make adjustments and then save them out as a cube file so you can load it as a LUT. But unfortunately, you cannot right now. Maybe that'll come in the future. Moral of the story, LUTs are a way of impacting your color overall, and it can really change, again, the mood, the feel, the vibe, whatever you want to call it, of your image, but also alter some things in positive or negative ways. So you don't have as much control over the LUT filter as you would in some of the other circumstances. So I would use this as almost like a quick edit button, right? That's what I would think of this as. So the next one is photo filter. Photo filter. All right, so your photo filter overall, this is to simulate back in the day, or even still today, where you would put a colored gel in front of your lens or whatever, and this would give that tone over the image, right? Because as the light passes through, hits your sensor, it captures that color into your image. And you have a few different options here. You have a graduated, you have the bicolor, and then you also have a center filter. And then here you get access to your color wheel and all the sliders. So if there's a specific color, there's some really creative utility that you can use with this. I particularly enjoy using the polarizer just because it builds contrast in a really cool way. I think that this works great on landscapes. I would not recommend it so much on portraits, but you know, your art, your creativity, do you, man, do you. All right, the next on the list is replace color. Replace color. Now, this is a very specific thing. If I said, you know what, I don't like the red in the barn, I'm going to click on it and it's going to give me this color change option. Now, mind you, this is also only available in ON1 2021. If you have 2020 or earlier, you're not going to have access to this particular filter. So I can just drag this hue. Again, this is changing the color on the spectrum. And if that was just a little too much saturated for my liking, whatever, then, you know, I can pull that down. Now, if I want to be very specific, you know, you can pull the range to all the way down and it should be only in that area, but obviously it's not. So it works. I recommend not only using the replace color with the eyedropper, but also running a mask over it. You know, you can hit invert, and then I'll make my brush just a little bit smaller, just so I can show you how this works. Shift X, and then just paint in where I want this adjustment to be. Now, I can paint a little sloppy, assuming that you don't have a ton of colors, but this may be a good place for the perfect brush to come in and, you know, kind of save the day. But as you can see, it works pretty good. You can change the color to whatever you want. So if I don't want purple bricks, then I can make them maybe green or whatever color I want. It's really good, especially if you're doing color pops. All right. Replace color. It does exactly that. Allows you to select a color and then replace it. The next one is split tone. Now, this is one of my favorite filters just because it's very simple. And I guess coming from Lightroom, this was one of my most used filters. There's something about just messing around with the balance between the highlights and the brights. You know, some people call it color grading. I just like to leave it called split tone. I think that that's an appropriate name for it. But essentially what you get to do here is select the highlight color and the shadow color. Again, I have videos that are going to cover these filters. I just want to break down which filters affect your color overall in the image, so that way you can make a little bit more educated guess when you choose your filters. So the next one is going to be sunshine. Ooh, sunshine. All right. As you can see, it, one, brightens the image, but two, it also adds a warm feel to it. Now, this is hopefully used as a more subtle adjustment, right? Maybe you wanted your image to be a little bit brighter, and that's where, and a little bit more sunny-esque, right? The challenge with using the sunshine filter is the fact that you can end up having some white balance issues. So you just got to be careful with it. But overall, it's a fairly simple slider to use. I mean, we can go with glow, and you can see that that's going to soften the overall look of the image, which does impact the colors just a little bit. And it's a perceived impact. It's not a deliberate impact. There's a little bit of yellow that's added into the foreground here on this grass. If you just take a look at, uh-oh, I clicked the wrong button. Go figure. If you click on the little blue button next to the filter, it'll actually do something for you. So yeah, you can see that it's adding in a little bit of yellow, and that's just because this glow filter, if I pull that down, you can see that it's not really doing a whole lot. And then of course there's some saturation and a little bit more of the warmth. Moral of the story, just know that this is more of a perceived feel to the color, and I recommend adding this at the end of your workflow if you're going to add the sunshine filter. And the last one that affects color. Now there's other ones that affect the color, but these are the ones that I think you'll use the most often, with the exception of the cross process. I don't think you'll use that. And maybe even the photo filter. Those are probably two that you won't grab as often. Nonetheless, vintage. Now, similar to antique, this gives you more of a throwback vibe to just like antique. This one works a little bit different as it shifts the color, but it gives you access to film grain. I don't believe antique. Wow, I can't speak. Antique. Oh, I guess antique does give you access to film grain. I didn't pay attention to that before. All right, very good. So as you can see, if I throw antique and vintage on at the exact same time, this really does look like it was a throwback. And, you know, this is a perfect image for something like that. Again, this is an image that was contributed by Andrea Beeson. So shout out to her. But overall, this, you know, I think that this particular image does well with these types of filters. So I'm going to go ahead and turn off the antique one because we want to look at the vintage one by itself. Now, as you can see, the vintage, it doesn't desaturate the photo as much. And you can even add in some saturation. and you get a different feel, right? Vintage and antique give you two different looks at the same photo, just a little bit different, right? Here, we'll even just duplicate this layer, and we will go ahead and add the antique, just because I think it's worthwhile to show you the difference between the two, right? So here's antique out of the box, and then here is vintage. These are two very different looking filters overall. So something to keep in mind as you are in your post-production workflow. Which one of these would you prefer? Would you prefer something with more color? And don't get me wrong, you can absolutely click on here and you can desaturate this and get a little bit more desaturated look. You can throw in the film grain. I will note that you don't get to choose the type of grain. I guess there was all just generic vintage film grain back in the day. That's not the case, but in ON1 and for this filter, it's fine, right? It's just for fun. Have some fun. But there you have it. Now you got saturation, you got your film grain, and it looks very different than this, which has a ton of film grain probably, because you could just see the film grain. All right. So those are all of the filters that affect color. Well, there you have it. All the filters that affect color inside of ON1 Photo Raw. Hopefully you found this somewhat informative and gives you a good overview and understanding of which filter you want to grab. Now, moving forward, what we're going to do is break down each of these filters and get into some creative ways of using them so you can edit your photo. And then at the end of this series, we're going to put it all together. I'm going to throw in some live streams where we can really dive deeper. So if you're finding value in this series, please do me a favor. 1, hit the like button. 2, if you're new here, consider hitting the subscribe button. I create videos centered around ON1 Photo Raw, seemingly. That's what I mostly produce. But I do use other applications, and someday I'm going to get those videos here on the channel. But for right now, I'm just using ON1 Photo Raw, and you are in the Creative Color miniseries. If you found it helpful, then thank you. Leave a comment below. Let me know what filter you plan to use, what filters you're already using in your workflow. Let me know any questions that you have very specific to using color inside of ON1 Photo Raw. Until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.